Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you and talk about a modification that you can do to your Epson printer that is very useful and very interesting for most of printer owners, and as I said, can be very useful and can actually save you a lot of money. For this video I have an Epson Expression Home XP2105 as a demonstration, but you can do it to nearly every Epson printer that you can have. You just check for the compatibility of your model and you're pretty good to go. I'm talking about the Chipless firmware mod, and I will talk about what is it, how can you install it on your printer, and everything you need to know. Now, first of all, what is a Chipless firmware? As the name suggests, a chipless firmware is a firmware, so the software that lives inside of your printer, the one that you use to control every aspect of your printer directly from it. The firmware is also the software that controls every aspect of the functionality of the printer. I mean, if you get a printer and you install some not genuine ink cartridges, as an example, the firmware is that piece of software that checks for those cartridges and tells you, hey, you have installed some non-genuine ink cartridges, would you like to use them or to reject them? And that is a firmware. It's a software that checks every aspect of the function of the printer, service, and every other thing that is directly related to the hardware of the printer. So, a chipless firmware is a firmware that has the ink monitoring disabled. And by that I mean that you can actually install whatever cartridges you want in the printer, and the printer will always display that the cartridges are at a level of 100%. And that can be very useful for a few reasons. The first reason is that you can save a lot of money by not wasting so much ink. And that is especially true if you use a CIS unit, so a continuous ink supply system, CISS. A CIS is a very interesting mod for itself that you can do to your printer. Basically, it consists of 4 cartridges. They're not cartridges at all. They are dampers. They get installed into the printhead at the place of your cartridges. So instead of your 4 cartridges, you have these 4 dampers that you install into the carriage. And from those 4 dampers, you have 4 tubes. So it's a ribbon of 4 little tubes that comes out of the carriage. And usually you can just tape them or clip them at a side of the printer, close the lid, and at a side of the printer you have some tanks. And those tanks are a lot larger than every cartridges you can buy, and those tubes are connected to those tanks, and that allows you to print whatever you want without ever worrying for cartridges being depleted, because you have some tanks at the side of the printer. You just need to rotate a bit your sight and see actually the correct ink level that your CIS unit has. And when a tank gets low, it's very simple. You just take off the plug, get some ink inside of the tank, refill the tank, and you're ready to print several thousands of pages for every refill. And that is incredibly cheap, because you can just buy the ink in bulk, and you don't need to buy cartridges, you just need the ink. But a pretty annoying thing about the CIS is that the printer actually monitors the ink level as you were using cartridges. I mean, you have the sys unit with those big tanks to a side, and you can actually see the ink levels. But when the printer thinks that the cartridge you have inside the printer is depleted, you have to generally open the lid, press a button for several seconds, then close the lid, and the printer will run a cleaning cycle. Exactly the way when you replace the cartridges with the new ones. So it performs a purge cycle because the printer thinks that you replaced some normal cartridges. The printer does not know that you have a sys unit inside. So it wastes a lot of ink in the process every time you do this, even though it's not necessary at all, because you have not replaced any cartridges in the process. The cartridges you have are the dampers and are constantly connected to the carriage, so there's no need to perform a purge cycle. And that alone is a very big reason why chipless firmware could be a very good idea if you have a sys unit installed. The second thing, and the second reason why a chipless firmware is a so nice thing, is that you can actually print whatever you want without worrying for the cartridges being depleted. I mean, if you have a home printer like this one, you have pretty small ink cartridges, especially if you're running on the setup ones or the standard ones. Those are very small. So you will probably run into the situation where you have to print an urgent document, you have to perform a print, you have to print something, then sign it and scan it and send it back or something like that, and your example magenta or cyan or yellow cartridge is empty, and even though you have some black ink, you cannot print that black and white document because one of those cartridges has been declared empty by the printer itself. So that is a pretty bad thing that can happen to you. And if you have a chipless firmware, you don't need to worry for neither of those things. You can save money, you can print whatever you want without worrying about the ink cartridges being depleted. So, said this, you can actually do this yourself. You don't need the help to anyone to perform this mod, and I will show you how to do this on this printer. Before you upgrade your printer firmware to the chipless one, you need to think about something, and that is what type of system or cartridge you use on the printer. If you have a sys unit, it's not a problem because you can actually see the ink levels in the unit at a side of the printer. If you don't have a sys unit and you have, as an example, refillable ink cartridges or some OEM ink cartridges that you actually refilled, well, you have to pay close attention to the ink level, because if the ink level goes down and the cartridge that you are using gets depleted, well, at first it's not a big problem because air gets inside of the printhead and you just start printing without ink on a specific channel. So if you see the problem and you immediately refill the cartridges and do some cleaning cycles, that is not a problem because the printer replenishes the print head channels, takes out the air and takes in the ink, so no problem there. But if you print with no ink inside of the printhead for a long time in a specific ink channel, you probably will ruin that specific channel. So if you don't have a sys and you are using another type of cartridges in your printer and you want to go chipless, you can actually do it, but you need to be very careful to check the ink levels. So to perform this mod, the printer needs to be connected to the computer via USB cable, and you need a Windows computer. So if you don't have one of those two things that you need, you can just borrow or get some in some ways because they are needed. This software does not work on Mac and does not work on Wi-Fi. That is generally because it needs to be 100% sure of the data that is communicated to the printer, and network communication protocol is not enabled when you are performing a firmware update. So yeah, let's start with the firmware update, and I will show you everything you need to know to do this yourself. Okay, as you can see, I have connected the printer to a USB cable. This is, but the cable is not connected to the computer at the other end, because I want to show you first a few things. First, how to get software and the activation, and second, I want to show you the actual level of the ink cartridges, because I know that probably some people could come to me and tell me, hey, your cartridges were already at 100%, but no, they are not at 100%. So the first thing we can do is go to inkchip.net and hit enter, and then go to soft, and here you can find every model of printer that is supported for the Epson series, and for each model you can find a video where in a few minutes it will tell you exactly what to do to install the Chipless firmware. My video is a little bit on the detailed and longer side of things. So first of all, you need to locate your printer model number, and in our case it's XP2105, this one, and you can see new. It's because InkChip is constantly developing and uploading to the site new firmwares for new printers and new releases by Epson. So if you're interested in laser printers, there's a section either for laser printers, but this actual video does not apply to any of these. I have made a video on the laser chipless firmware, but now we are talking about the Epson. So first of all, you need to download the firmware and the activation. So you have these two files over here. This is the firmware, and you have to extract from the RAR file the folder that is contained inside. You can even delete the downloaded file then. And so here you have the firmware, and as you can see, it's like the Epson firmware updater. It's definitely like the Epson stock one. And then we have the activation program. So there are two programs that you actually need. Second thing you need is to go to price, and you have to buy the activation key for the chipless firmware. And you can see for this printer the price is $35 US. For other models the price may be different, and if you live in another country, there is no problem. I live in Italy and I can buy all of this stuff with a credit or debit card. So you can go to buy, and you can buy the firmware you need. So you can go to select your specific key, one key, add to cart, and you actually have added to cart an Epson XP2105 reset key. Well, not reset key, it's a chipless mod key. You can proceed to checkout, and here you can insert your data and your credit card or debit card number or Alipay and place an order. So after you have placed an order, they will contact you via email, sending you the key. And there is a reason why you have to check for a valid email address. You have to insert a valid email address. And if you don't receive the key immediately or after a few hours, you can actually look into the spam folder. You don't find it there, you can contact InkChip support. They are very nice people. They are always ready to help you if you have problems doing the modification or you have any problem with your order. They are right there to help you out. So yeah, you can place your order and then you receive the key. So at this point we can do the firmware upgrade and the activation. So let's see how we're going to do this. Okay, so on this model of printer, to apply the Chipless firmware, you need to power the printer off, and then you need to do this combination in order to start the printer in the firmware upgrade mode. Okay, so the key combination is stop, color copy, Wi-Fi and power. Okay, so as you can see, the printer now has every LED on, and that means that the printer is ready to the firmware upgrade. Okay, so at this point we can connect the USB cable to the computer, and the computer will recognize the printer as an unknown device usually. So we can actually open the folder that contains the firmware update and start this file, so the .exe file. Authorize the startup, and the printer will be listed inside here. Can accept, next. Okay, so at first it didn't actually find the USB printer, but I just switched USB ports and now it found it. So we can now click start and it will start the firmware update. Okay, we have reached a point in the firmware update that all LEDs blink and synchronized and at the same time. So at this point we need to press the stop button for one time. The printer will restart and your Chipless firmware mod will be almost complete. Well, we need to activate it, but the firmware is already installed. So let's do this. Okay, so you can see the printer is initializing. Okay, so now that our printer firmware is installed, we need to activate it. So we need to launch the activation. Now our printer is actually connected still via USB, so that's why you can see it here. And we have to look for our activation key, okay, and we can click activate online. So here you can see some informations about the printer. You can insert a code and click OK. Okay, so the software actually told us that the activation key has been written, so the printer is ready, and we have to restart the printer by pressing the power button, and everything is fine. So one thing you have to do is copy this recovery key, so select it and copy it, and save it somewhere safe, because if you in some ways update the printer and the Chipless firmware gets erased, with this recovery code you can actually recover your printer and use the Chipless firmware again. Let's restart the printer. Okay, in the meantime, while the printer was restarting, I have copied and created a file with the recovery code. Let's see the ink levels though. So let's go and see the ink levels. Let's go to no, not device manager, devices and printers. So let's get the results of our printer. And as you can see, every one of those levels is at 100%. And you have actually seen at the start of the video that the levels were not 100%. So this is actually the proof that our system works totally fine, and you can actually use whatever cartridges you want, even some without any chip, in this printer with this configuration. So that's it. One important thing is to disable the updates, the software updates on your computer, because if the firmware gets updated, you will lose the Chipless firmware. That's why they give you the recovery code. So that is a very important thing. But this can be even good, because let's say you want to sell this printer or give this printer to someone, and you don't want it to be used with a sys, so you want to get rid of the Chipless firmware in any way, with any for any reason you want to remove the Chipless firmware, you can just update the firmware and it will get rid of it. So it's a very interesting mod, because it's not permanent, yet it's so useful, and you can use it for whatever Epson printer you want. So this video, as stated at the starting of this video, has been a collaboration with InkChip. I have worked with them in other times for the laser printer InkChip Chipless firmware, and for the wick reset for Epson printers, and they have always been amazing with me. So if you want to check out, in the description I will leave every link you will need to perform this mod yourself. So thank you, and have a nice day. I hope you learned something useful, and I hope you will get something useful out of this video. So thank you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.